Hello, everybody, and welcome to our next episode of the history of video gaming. Today is the return of the Odyssey. But before we start off with that, I'm here with Ben. How you doing, Ben?
I'm doing great. How are you, Wes?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's start off with our usual of what games you've been playing recently.
Yeah, I've been playing something a little different. I've still been playing a lot of RuneScape. I can't deny that, but I feel like we've talked about that for a while. And I'm basically doing the same thing. But so I still have been playing a fair amount of the Avengers game, like mobile game thing.
Oh,
that
yeah,
I mentioned a while
Strike
ago.
Force, right?
Yeah, Strike Force.
Yeah.
And I'm basically like at a level now where I log in, I open my like 2 boxes or whatever, and I hit auto win 10 times, and then I'm like, that's all I can do for like 6 hours or something. So I've been looking for another game to play when I've got, a minute or two here and there.
Yeah.
And I still had downloaded a bunch of like Warhammer 40k games from when I was going on vacation, but I never played some of them. And I started playing this card game called Horus Heresy Legions. And
Ooh, okay.
I've been kind of in the mood for a card game, so it kind of like really worked out. And I've tried a whole bunch, but there's just like something wrong with like everyone I try, it seems. Like the Yu-Gi-Oh one, like the UI is like terrible. It's definitely like not good.
Yeah.
The Pokemon one is like definitely like for kids, and it feels really weird to play, and there's just something like wrong with a bunch. Like Magic you have to pay for, so
I was gonna say, because Magic looks really good, but
it does. Like they have a mobile app, but they stopped supporting it, so I was like, well, I could play this and the 2 expansions it has, but it's not going to get a third, so what's the point?
Okay.
But I like 40k, and have a card game is pretty cool, and it's basically exactly like Hearthstone, how it plays. There is like a couple differences, and they're all in like ways that I really like. Like for one thing, you get 3 packs a day for playing 5 games.
Oh, fantastic.
I know. That's like, what, you might get a third of a pack in Hearthstone, right? Something like that.
I mean, I forget how they even worked. You had to grind so much to get packs.
I know. It was crazy, but in this, it feels like they're handing them out, and it doesn't seem to be like level based, so it's not like the further I get in, the less packs I'll make. So
good, yeah,
that's cool. And the other thing I really like about it is, if you can imagine in Hearthstone, you've got your 9 classes or whatever, and you've got a lot of classes here, but in each class you can pick a warlord or like your hero, and they all have like different hero powers, and they might be different health. They might have like different special abilities. Like, it's pretty cool. I'm really kind of getting into it. So
nice.
Yeah, it's cool. And it's also interesting because all the warlords are like, the high level Warhammer fighting dudes. So every single one has a weapon, if you can imagine that. It's not, that's not what they call it, but if you can imagine in Hearthstone, like every hero having like a base attack that they have all the time.
Okay. I gotcha.
I like
interesting.
That. Yeah. There are some really cool, interesting sort of things they have going on with it. So I just played, I guess you could say it was like a Tavern Brawl sort of deal, like a little event they had.
Yeah.
And I had to versus like Titan, and it had like 5 cards on the board at all time that were like the different weapons it had. It was super cool. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. So
sweet, yeah.
I mean, I don't know, it might fall off like a week from now, but
depends. So far, with card games, I mean, can be hit or miss. Either you already collect everything you want and then you get a little bored, or it takes you too long to collect anything.
Yeah, I'm always worried with a game like this that the managing your deck aspect of it will just start to get too complicated once I build a big enough collection.
Right.
In so Hearthstone, it's on the computer, and it's like arranged in a nice way. But if it's on an iPad, it can be hard to go through like 15,000 pages of cards, Oh
yeah, I could see that being a pain, especially if they don't have a good system for it.
Yeah. I'm lucky that the game, just like Hearthstone, limits you to 30 cards in your deck, because like I think it was Pokemon, you could have as many cards as you wanted, and I hate that. Like, I never know what I'm supposed to be doing. So
yeah,
it's pretty cool.
the one where it was the gods from different pantheons. Couldn't you make a as large deck as you wanted in that too?
I think so. Yeah.
Jeez, that was a while ago we were playing that one. But that was a pretty good one too. I just got bored of it, but I can't even remember what it's called. It might be called Pantheon.
Yeah, I should play that again.
I was gonna say that one's actually pretty good too. So if you want a computer one to check out.
I think Allegiance is on Steam, but I haven't checked it out yet. I just downloaded it like a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Well, I opened it a couple days ago, so.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I love the Warhammer theme, obviously. They don't have all the legions yet. I guess they're doing a couple other expansion, but they do have the Raven Guard, who are like my favorite. So
oh yeah.
Although I don't have a Warlord yet, so I can't play them right now, but that's my goal, so it's fun.
Nice.
Digging it.
Very, very cool.
And I'm winning a fair amount of games, so
that's good.
That's always good. That helps.
Yes, yeah, definitely helps with making the game you enjoy the game more.
Yeah. What have you been playing, Wes?
Well, so I every couple months or so, or a couple weeks, get the urge to see if I can finally make a push and actually beat a Darkest Dungeon campaign, because I just always restart every time people die and never get very far.
Yeah.
But one of the most recent times I played it, I played through a decent bit and got to like a higher level and like got the main starting area upgraded a lot more than I had before. So I'm feeling it this time. I think I realized that the hardest dungeon is called the Darkest Dungeon in the game, and I've never actually done that. I've played this game for 70 hours, but never actually done the Darkest Dungeon. So I'm getting to the point where I'm going to be able to start running that.
Nice.
And I'm sure everyone that I love will die, but it's been good. I try not to look up too much, but there's like certain party compositions that just like work super well with all the different character classes.
Okay.
And I started doing I don't know if you'd call it a build, I guess just like a party comp that I hadn't done before, where basically like all of your characters have a movement skill. So no matter what their position they're in, they can do an attack that also gets them back into their regular position.
Okay.
And it just makes it super like dynamic. And there's a lot of times when the enemies like shuffle your whole squad's position so that nobody can do the right moves. But if you use that kind of squad, everyone can just get back where they're supposed to be.
Nice.
But
cool.
Yeah, so a lot of different like gameplay things that I didn't even, just playing like the first like intro 10 hours and then quitting and restarting my campaign, I never really got to do all those.
Yeah. A game like that, I know has like a lot of like, you could play it another 100 hours and still be like learning stuff,
Yeah. There's a ton of cool stuff to it. And also I want to make sure I definitely have to beat it before Darkest Dungeon 2 releases.
Oh, when's that coming out?
I don't know if they've given a date. They just teased like a snowy mountain in a title, so it's probably still pretty far off.
I just saw a couple trailers for other games we know that might be coming out, like a new Mountain Blade game. I saw a trailer for.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not the one that's been in development, or a different one?
I think it has been in development for like years.
Yeah. War Banner, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there was another game too, but I forget what it was. But
that's
another
that Mountain Blade one. Yeah, the Mountain Blade one, if it ever comes out, looks real good. I saw one of their dev videos like a couple months back. You could like put together like a hilt and a handle and a blade to make your own weapon, and then you can name it.
Okay.
Which I feel like would just be fantastic. And Mountain Blade adds to like the ridiculousness of like this super strong guy killing everybody with this sword that I made and named.
Yeah.
So I'm super hyped for that. I'll have to see if there's any more news on it. But yeah, Darkest Dungeon pretty much what I've been playing for now.
Nice. You want to get into our special topic? Because I think it's another, kind of building off of last week's.
Yes, yeah, and we had mentioned before, but yeah, let's get right into it.
Yeah, so today marks the first episode of 1975, so welcome to that. We'll talk about it more in the second half, where we go through the timeline, but in order to celebrate the end of 1974, Wes and I have picked some of our favorite games from 1974 and also some of our least favorite games, and we're going to share them with you guys. So if you want like a quick rundown of what you should be looking for, hopefully this is that. So why don't we start with our least favorite, Wes? Why don't you start?
All right. And I know we were talking about guesses for favorites, but do you think you have a guess for what my least favorite is?
I feel like this is a hard one. I'm not quite sure what it might be. Maybe like Bulls and Cleots?
Right on the money.
Oh, yeah.
And part of that, I'm sure, is a recency effect and just that it's still fresh in my mind how much I didn't like that game. But yeah, Bulls and Cleots I only picked one least favorite, and that was my number one least favorite of 74.
Do you want to like describe to the people why it's so bad?
Oh, absolutely. I will get into it. I do feel like it might be a little unfair because I'm still not sure if it's like designed to be a game for fun or if they're just like, hey, look, a computer can do this and it's like quote unquote a game.
Yeah.
But it's just like definitely not my thing. Like guessing letter, number, and symbol sequences that don't even have to be words or have like any significant meaning.
Yeah.
And then just like drawing up based on the scores that you get back and being like, well, I have at least this many letters right and this many letters that are wrong but are still in the word, and really not my type of game. Yeah. Basically is what it comes down to. I don't I feel like it's you can kind of equate it to Sudoku, but I could play a little bit of Sudoku and have fun with it, but like sitting down there and being like, all right, I'm going to figure out how to beat this computer at Bulls and Cleots. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like Sudoku has a strategy to it, and this is like, I'm just guessing.
Yeah, or at least when I play it. Like, I'm sure there are people who have the strategy down, and like, if not for that game, because I don't know if anyone still plays in Bulls and Cleots, but like a similar type game, I'm sure there's strategy, but like I'd get so bored halfway through that I'd just be like typing random stuff in there.
Yeah. I don't blame you.
All right, so then let's go over to you. What do you think, or what's your least favorite?
Well, what do you think, Wes?
I feel like it's got to be something very similar to Bulls and Cleots, like Button.
It's a fair guess, but it's not correct.
Okay.
The worst game I played by far was Space Sim.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Released March of 74. I mean, to be fair, it was like one of the first FPS games, if not the first ever made. So it was trying really hard to be something. But yeah, I played this game for like 3 hours. And basically what the game is, it's a first person spaceship sort of game. You're flying through the universe. Your goal is to like find an enemy base and destroy it and then protect your own base at the same time. And I never found an enemy base. I never found another star system because I spent like 3 hours just trying to figure out how to pilot the spacecraft, and it was overly complicated to the point of it being unplayable. So,
right.
Yeah. It was not good. I would say unplayable's right up there with not good. So, yeah, it has to be Space Sim.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and you could at least play the other one by that developer a little bit.
Yeah, like Button and also what was the other one? Beyond Bagels.
Beyond Bagels, yeah.
Yeah, they're just like other guessing games, but at least you can figure out what's going on in like 15 minutes and be like, okay, right. this sucks and I know it now, but it's not like you're 3 hours in and you're like, I feel like I need to push on because I haven't even done half of the game mechanics yet.
Yeah, that's brutal.
It was no good. So hopefully it's the worst one that I will ever have to play in the timeline, but somehow I doubt that.
Yeah, you don't want to jinx yourself on that one, but we can be optimistic.
Yeah. All right, let's move into our top 3 favorites. So let me see. What might be in your top 3? I hope Tank's in there somewhere.
Okay.
I hope Maze War is in there. And yeah, I'm going to go with those 2 guesses right now. But why don't we start with your number 3? See if I got any of them.
Sounds good. And I will leave the suspense on of whether or not you got any of the right ones there.
Mm-hmm.
But so my number 3 for my favorite games was Clean Sweep by Ramtech.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I knew you said you loved that one, but
yeah,
I didn't think it would make top 3.
and I don't know what it is about it. Released in May of 74, but for some reason, even though it's really simple and I don't know exactly what it is about why I like it, it's definitely number 3 on my list. I feel like something about the brick breaking style of game, and that like this was one of the originators of that, was really nostalgic to me, because I feel like I played a lot of those on like web versions. I forget what you call it, like Flash games. Like usually like Monkey Balloons or whatever. If they had, I forget if they had a brick breaking, but whatever the balloon type game was. But something about it, yeah. And even though the controls were a little janky and it was kind of hard to play on the version I played because I was flying all over the screen with the paddle, I still think it was a lot of fun. And just the fact that it had like a high score and different levels kind of gives you the aspect of like, all right, one more, I can do better. And it was one of the few that I like really, I didn't spend a ton of time playing it, but I was like, oh yeah, I can do like a couple rounds more than just like what I needed to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a good one.
It just reminds me of like a game that has one of those like formulas about it that it seems like is timeless, you know, like we see those games today and people still love them. So
right. Yeah. I feel like in like free games or like mobile games, like Brick Breaker is still like such a huge thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right. And then I guess if we're doing a little trade-off of going through our top 3, I should guess what's in yours.
Yeah, what do you think? This is hard, to be honest.
I feel like I know Grand Track 10 is going to be in there. Oh, well, maybe not, because then there's also Speed Race. Okay, well, I think I'm going to say Speed Race and maybe even Grand Track 10, both in there. That's all I got right now. It is kind of hard to narrow it down.
Yeah, I mean, they're fair guesses. I think my number 3 is going to surprise you for sure, though.
All right, yeah.
It kind of surprised me, but one of the ones that I look back on and I'm like, wow, that was like such a cool game, is Basketball by Taito. Which was in our first 1974 episode. And I don't know what about it. It's just like remembering back to it. I just have like fond memories of it for some reason, but it was a first game to have human sprites and they look cool. And I was like, man, it's good to see a human in one of these games.
Right.
And I'm a big fan of basketball, and I liked how it was basically Pong, but you had to get the ball up through the net. You know, it wasn't just like touching the net or, you know, just hitting a side of a screen, but actually had to go through like a little hoop thing. And I was like, oh, that's basketball. And I also liked how there was constant gameplay, because as soon as it went in, it just kept going, you know?
Yeah, you didn't have to wait for it to reset in the middle and hit serve or whatever.
Yeah, so I don't know what about it. There's just something like nostalgically cute about it to me. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, it's like a really old kind of bad looking game, but in like a way that's like, oh, what a cool game. So that was a hard one. That a couple games, you know, were in there for my number 3, but I felt like you probably weren't going to pick basketball for good reason, and I was like, you know what? We're going to put it in there. Good game.
It definitely deserves a little bit of recognition, and I did look over that for a bit, and I was like, you know, that was pretty fun and interesting, but wasn't
I think
top
of
3
all
for me.
of all the Pong clones of 74, I think that's the best one, other than Wipeout, which is basically elimination, and I brought that up in the last episode. So
right, yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't recommend any other one, I don't think.
No, not Flim Flam didn't make my list.
How could that be? What did make your list, Wes? What's your number 2?
All right, well, let's go on to one that you definitely guessed, and that's Tank Key Games for my number 2.
I knew
it came out. It kind of had to be, right?
Yeah.
It came out November 74, and it was a commercial success. And this is one that I didn't even really get to play at all, but just watched other people playing it, and it just looks so fun. And I feel like it's such like a classic sort of thing. And I feel like with a lot of these, like you were talking about with basketball, nostalgia kind of plays a big part into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept equating it to the We Play Tanks game.
Yeah.
Which I played like loads of hours with my friends when they would like come over and hang out. And that one's a little bit different because it's cooperative, but you're competing for score. but just the idea of like two tanks duking it out in a video game. This one kind of felt like the grandfather of the We Play Tanks game. So I really loved that, and going into it, I had all that nostalgia with it. And just everything else about it, like the sounds, the simple visuals, but the cool tank sprites and the gameplay, they all kind of just meld together in a way that I thought worked really well for the game and made it just kind of like a classic arcade game.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a reason why it sold so well.
Right.
And it's just because it's a good game. Like any kind of like, get you and your buddy in the same room and trying to shoot each other, it's like gonna be a good time, I think.
Yeah, bound to be a hit. Yeah, and they just kind of kept it simple, did it well, added a few interesting things like walls and mines, and it was like just enough to be like, all right, that's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my number 2. I think I'm still striking out for guessing yours. What's your number 2, Ben?
Well, I think you're not going to be striking out for very long, Wes. Because my number 2 is Grand Track 10.
There we go.
Yeah. I mean, you knew it. I knew it. So this came out in May of 74, and it's basically a top-down race track type game where it really feels more like an RC car kind of going around the course. But what was really cool about it was you had the wheel peripheral and you had the accelerator and all that stuff for the first time. So that was really, really cool. And it was like a true like race car with oil slicks on the track and, trying to get as far as you can on the track in as fast a time as possible. So I don't know. It just like, it had all the spirit of a core racing game. And I don't know. There's something about it that I really enjoyed. Again, I think it's a bit nostalgic in a way where, it's kind of, you're not expecting much from it, but it kind of gives you more than you were expecting, which is really, really cool. So yeah, Grand Track 10. What do you think, Wes?
It's awesome. And just hearing you talk about it, I knew how excited you were about it. So I figured it had to make the list somewhere.
Yeah. And it was a hit with other people too, as we know, just because it's like had, I don't know how many spinoffs, but I think we covered maybe 5 or 6.
Right. It's incredibly popular.
So yeah, and I don't know, it had like an arcadey feel to it, which I think really helped it. It wasn't just pure realism or something. It had a very fun sort of laid back feel, which I think helped it a lot.
Yeah, it feels like something you can play in a cabinet in an arcade.
Right, which is what it was meant to do. So
exactly.
I think we should go to number 1.
Yeah, so that sounds good to me. And mine, I don't think you said it, which surprises me a little bit.
Oh, it's not Maze War.
Dang it. It is not Maze War, no. It is, because I love space, Star Trader.
Ooh.
In January 74 is when this one came out.
Oh.
And just for a quick refresher, it was basically just a sort of text game. Did have a map where it kind of showed you where the planets were, but not really any graphics there. But you just managed a couple different ships, and you went against somebody else who was managing ships, trading between planets and seeing who could make the most money. And definitely a lot of it is just because I like space games. Like, I'm not going to say like this is the best game, but just something about it I really like. And that it's like this thing that's so core to all space sims now, to have like that trading aspect.
Mm-hmm.
And this really does it pretty well. And even though trading isn't like my favorite part of space sims, just the fact that this is sort of like the originator of a lot of that, and it executed it well. You had like 6 different elements and like simulated supply and demand kind of stuff going on. So it was nice that it was dynamic, and while it was complicated, I felt like it was simple enough that I could get a hold of what I needed to do with my different ships and how to trade and get into it pretty quickly. Though I didn't get a chance to actually try playing it multiplayer. I think that would also be pretty cool to have this sort of like competitive trading company sort of game going on to see who can make the most money with your friend.
Yeah.
And yeah, just again, space, I'm a sucker for space.
Hey, that's all right.
I think it was a fun game, and I think it's cool that it laid the foundation for a lot of the space sim trading kind of stuff.
Yeah. It seems like it had the core of what made all of your other, games that you love to play that came out later, it like had that, you know, same soul in it. So
right, and it
I
got a
could
lot
see
of it
that.
like right in like what was probably one of the first incarnations of a
Right.
game,
Yeah.
a space trading kind of game. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I was just very impressed by it. But
Wow.
let's go over and hear what your number one was after that big surprise.
I know. I didn't think that, but I shouldn't have been surprised by that. So you guessed my number one. It's Speed Race.
Okay. I
Yeah,
knew it.
by Taito. And the reason why this game is so good is it makes you feel like you're going fast, like really fast, you know, like 120 miles an hour fast, which, you know, Grand Track 10, for all the arcadey funness it has, it doesn't make you feel like you're going very fast.
Right.
You know, there's a lot of really tight turns and stuff. But on this game, it has endless scrolling graphics. So if you can go faster, you know, the cars from the top of the screen are going to slowly come towards you. But if you go faster and faster, they'll just keep popping down like faster and faster. And you can go as fast as you can go. So it just, you know, it had a lot of really cool technology innovations for the time, but also used those innovations in a way that made sense for the game that they were making, which is, you know, sometimes the opposite of what ends up happening. But
right, you're not shoehorning the technology into a like game type or a genre where it doesn't make sense. Like the scrolling graphics fit like perfectly with a racing game.
Exactly. So I really enjoyed that and thought, not only is this a big hint of what's to come, but as a core game itself, it's still fun. It's still the perfect type of arcade game where you could get in and see how much farther you can get than your friends. So,
right.
And it still had the wheel peripherals and the accelerator and all that stuff. So it still felt like a really, you know, unique and somewhat real racing game. So yeah, that one, to me, there's nothing like going really, really fast in a speed racing game. So
yeah, I feel like that was a pretty easy pick. It's kind of what I figured. It was for the other stuff we were reviewing at the time. It just seemed like it did what it needed to do perfectly.
Yeah. Before we go on to the timeline, did you have any like honorable mentions you wanted to say? Because I kept going in between. Like I wanted to say baseball, but to be honest, I still don't think that came out in '74. So
that's right, because it was
shouldn't.
like crazy good.
Yeah, it is crazy good. I would definitely recommend people play it, but I was like, I still don't think this probably came out. So I don't want to say it. And then Maze War, I was like, oh, could throw that in there. That one would.
Maze War was good,
there.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason maybe it didn't click with me or I didn't remember it as well is because the version I played was sort of like a newer interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like not getting to play the original might have kind of thrown me for a loop. But now that I think about it more, it was like a very playable and cool FPS and the like contested for the first FPS. So that's definitely an honorable mention, and I mean possibly could have been or should have been included on the list.
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of reminds me of Tank in a way because it's a multiplayer shooter, but I feel like Tank is a lot more arcadey and more of like a complete experience than Maze War, which even though it was complete, still kind of, I think, probably felt a little bit like a tech demo in some ways, you know?
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it was in 74 that they had the multiplayer capability, but depending on when it became like 8-player multiplayer too, I think that helps out a lot.
Yeah. So, yeah, those are some of the best games. Be sure to check them out, all from 1974. We're about to go into 75, so why don't we talk about that more after our little music thing? All right, so getting into 1975, it's going to be a crazy year, Wes. I just want to tell you ahead of time. There's a lot of really cool, brand new games and brand new, what do you call it?
Consoles and
mechanics. Oh, that's what I was looking for. So a lot of brand new mechanics, and yeah, there's going to be quite a lot here. I covered in my research about 150 games, including the console games. Whereas with 1974, I think it was around 90. So quite a bit more that we've got to cover. I don't know how many episodes it'll be yet, but it'll be quite a few. And I thought before we get into 75, now would be a good time to just sort of remind people of the research process a little bit. We like to be really, really thorough here on our podcast, and we cover a lot of games, but there are always some games that are kind of what I would consider to be gray area games. I've talked about this before a little bit, but I just want to give a quick mention since we're starting a new year that every time I do research, there are games where I'm not sure, are they video games or are they electromechanical? And if I have a feeling like they're stronger one way or the other, I'll put them in that place, and we don't cover electromechanical games. So just know if you are out there doing your own research and you don't see one, that might be why. I also try to not put in games that were only ever prototypes or released as prototypes. You know, we might know that a certain game existed, but if it was never sold, in my opinion, it's not going to go on our list. And then a third thing that has come up a couple times has been games that I've only found on a single source. And usually it's only got like maybe a newspaper clipping or something like that as reference. And if there's only one source for it, you know, sometimes if I think, okay, maybe that did exist, I'll put it on our list. But other times I think maybe this is just like a prototype naming of something else that came out later that is on the list, or there could just be a ton of different reasons why a game that has very, very, very little information might not actually be real. So I include a lot of games on our list that are very small and don't have any information other than maybe a picture, but there are games that I think this is just, there's not enough to go off of to make me feel like this is actually a real game that came out. So just want everybody to know that. I wouldn't worry if your favorite game came out in 75. We are going to cover it. Like, I'm 99% sure, unless you own a cabinet, which is the only cabinet that was ever sold, you know, then we're going to cover it. So don't worry too much. I just wanted to give a quick PSA about what we do and what the next year is going to involve. So I think with that, we'll jump right into the games. The first one I have here is actually kind of a retcon of 74 because, you know, you do a bunch of research and you're like, oh man, I missed a game, I think. But, this one is called Ricochet by Allied Leisure. And some of my sources said it was 75, so it's not all on me, but it probably came out in 74. Like, I think I even seen one or two sources say 73, so, you know, it probably came out in 74, but it's basically a Pong doubles clone that was for international releases. So, you know, nothing too important or interesting, but yeah, that probably came out in 74. And then we've got the first game that I attempted to review. I should say I didn't review any games on this episode, but to be fair, I have spent like the last 24 hours researching. Like, that's not a joke. So
no, yeah, that's an accurate estimate.
Podcast. Yeah,
spent.
I finished 1975 like 4 hours ago, so just give me a break, people. But we do have cool games we'll talk about, and Wes definitely rated some. So I was going to try to rate these ones. Unfortunately, I couldn't get the programs to run. Basically, they're two basic games that are from a different magazine called Creative Computing. So I don't know if it's like a rival to People's Computer Company, but I don't think it is, because I think the People's Computer Company authors and stuff are also some of the authors on this. So maybe it's just a second newsletter or magazine for whatever reason. But I checked out, the first volume actually came out in November and December of 74. So I checked that one out, and I also checked out volume 2, which was January and February of 75. And most of the games that are included in there are just like remakes of other basic games like Chomp and Number and Life, you know, some other games that we've covered before. But there were two unique ones that I thought, oh, these are kind of cool. One was a game called Depth Charge, and it kind of reminded me of like a 3D battleship type game where you're kind of having to guess in a big grid where a ship might be, but then in addition to just like, coordinates that are like X and Y, you also have like a depth because you're actually trying to hit a submarine. So it's like, how deep do you want to go?
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. So it kind of reminded me of Battleship a little bit, but unlike Battleship, if you miss, it actually tells you, oh, it's actually to your west, or, it's actually deeper than you attempted. So you get hints along the way, and that kind of makes it feel a lot more like a game like Snark or Hunt the Wumpus or something like that, where you're kind of just looking or guessing where this thing that you're trying to hit is. And so I think it takes away some of the difficulty and enjoyment of it even. So I didn't think it was very interesting, but it is unique, so I wanted to mention it. And then we have another game called Magic Square, and I don't know if you know what magic squares are, Wes, but there's some like, I
don't know.
They're like a mathematical Sudoku type thing. It's not a game, it's more of like a prime numbers or something, where like there's a certain amount of combinations where you're like, oh, I found a new magic square, and it all worked out or whatever. So people are discovering magic squares all the time or making them. But in this, basically your goal is to make a magic square, but you put in a number and then the computer puts in a number, and the computer somehow knows to only put in a number that could make a magic square. So the thing is, can you take what the computer is giving you and finish off the magic square, or will you put in a number that won't work and then you lose the game?
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so very similar in that sense to a Sudoku kind of game.
Yeah, it's kind of like Sudoku, but like as if the computer's putting in some of the numbers for you. Or I guess, even Sudoku, you start with a bunch of numbers. So
yeah, depending on a lot of the easier difficulties, they have like a decent bit of the numbers filled in.
Yeah, I will say like this one's a little different because you might choose a number and then the computer chooses something that you weren't thinking of, and then you're like, oh, well, now what am I going to do? So It's a little different, but it's another kind of mathematical based puzzle game, but I would say this one I think is a little bit more interesting. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's definitely better than like a number guessing game. So again, I wanted to play this one, but I don't know how to code. I'm a musician, so gotta give me a break on that. And we have code for this, but if other people don't type them up and make them like all nice to work with our current day, what is it called? Basic. I don't even know the word for it, but what you use to run, what you use to run the programs with, like launchers.
Oh yeah. Yes, yeah.
If they don't like do that for me, it's really hard for me to do it, because I did it and I get all these errors like syntax error on line 74, and I'm like,
right,
okay, it could be anything, So
quoting Scotty and saying, "I'm not a coder, I'm a musician. Damn it."
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, those are a couple of the creative computing newsletter games, and we'll see a couple more from them. It's another interesting newsletter that really tries to teach people how to code. I think that was the whole point of it, or how to do their own things. And basically, they had a lot of like competitions where people would submit their own, code and stuff.
Right.
So, and they also have a lot of games that we've seen before, but they're like, oh, you can use this function to save this many lines of code, So it's a very educational based, but every now and then we'll see them pop up in a unique sort of way. So, yeah. Wes, do you want to move us into our next one?
Let's get on to one of the ones that I was able to review, not actually play, but watch a couple of videos of people playing this one. And this is an arcade cabinet called Sportarama, which was released by United Billiards, or their gaming division called United Games Incorporated. And this one, the year is uncertain, but it's likely to have come out in early 75 or I think late 74. And just another thing that was cracking me up when I was reading the flyer for this, because that's where we got a lot of the information, is that it states even experts can never truly master this game. They really had a high opinion. They used that line a little bit later to sell. They said the longer it's in your store, the more people will come and the more money you will make, which feel like it's a big statement, but maybe it was true. Who knows?
I feel like we're going to see a lot of those because in my research, I remember seeing one that I like almost cracked up about because it was like a graph and it was like a normal game and it showed like this peak at the beginning and then it goes downhill, as it gets older. And it's like our game. It's like a straight line at the top. I was like, oh my God. No.
Marketing at its finest.
No holding
you don't
back.
Need any, no X or Y axis numbers on there. Just trust that it makes you tons of money. But so Sportarama is basically a Pong clone cabinet. It's 2 to 4 players, and it does have 4 different game modes that you can play on it. But the most notable difference on this cabinet from other Pong clones is that it has what they call the attack button that kind of teleports your paddle onto the opposing player's side of the screen. Because on this cabinet, you could only move vertically, like in a lot of the Pong clones, instead of where you can also do the horizontal movement. Or, no, you can do horizontal movement, but you can't cross the center line. So the attack button lets you jump onto their side, and they quote it as play the offensive. And they use this in their attack game mode, which is basically Pong, except you can hold down the button to teleport to their side and hit the ball into the goal a little faster. And also in another game mode called Karate, where you can use the attack button to somehow hit the other player's paddle. And when you do, the ball gets sent through the paddle. But I didn't see a video of that one, so I'm not too sure what they meant by chopping the opponent's paddle.
Who knows?
Who knows? It was somehow different than the regular attack game mode, but it used the same button. And then the other 2 game modes that they had on this were just the typical tennis and hockey game modes that you see on a lot of these. And neither of them used the attack button so that people could also play those versions if they wanted. As far as I know, I think the owner would have to manually change the game mode that's set on the cabinet, but I'm not positive about that. And that was basically it. The attack game mode is kind of what made the big difference to this. So for my ratings for the graphics, I gave it just a 1 out of 10. It just kind of has the very simple, normal Pong graphics, a black background with the white lines, ball and paddle on it. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to see what it looked like when you played 4-player, but as far as I could tell, or my best guess, is that it would be a horizontal line similar to Flim Flam, where it was kind of 2 players on one team. It is interesting, though, that the cabinet seems, it's a fairly large cabinet, but all of the controls are jammed in the front, so you'd really be shoulder to shoulder if you were playing 4 people at once on the cabinet. And for the sound, I gave it just a 1 out of 10. It has the typical buzzes. As far as I could tell from the video I saw, it was pretty much identical to the Pong noises from a regular Pong cabinet. But for gameplay, I did think it did a pretty good job. I gave it a 3 out of 10. Even though it's simple and it's kind of sounds a little gimmicky, I think the attack button does a good job of adding a new twist to the Pong sort of gameplay, but also allowing it to be more of a skill-oriented twist. Because I feel like a lot of the games like Flim Flam, or when you're talking about like the Odyssey versions of tennis, the main twist was like, hey, you can make the ball move randomly.
Yeah.
Or with Odyssey, I guess you could put the English on it and actually you can decide where the ball moves, but that didn't seem, it just seemed weird. And Flim Flam, it just kind of like changed speed and direction. You're like, okay, that's different than, different than Pong, but like, I don't know if I'm really helping or hurting myself. But with this, you had to sort of weigh the trade-off between offense and defense, because when you're holding down the attack button, you don't have a paddle on your side of the screen because it's teleported to the other side. So you're just full offense then, and you can kind of play defense there, but you have to let go of the button real fast and get your paddle back if the ball starts flying onto your side of the court. So it is nice that there's sort of a trade-off, and if you got used to switching really quickly or knowing like, hey, I can push at this moment, go on the offense, hit it into his thing, and then there's zero risk of it going back into my side. I could really see it being a twist on Pong that actually lets you develop more skill. Maybe experts would be able to master it, contrary to what it says on the flyer, but I do think it allows for a larger kind of a curve of skill that you can get on the cabinet. And for relevance, I gave it a 3 out of 10. I think it's a unique innovation on traditional Pong, but I've never really heard of Sportarama. It didn't seem like this title in specific was very popular. I don't want to rate it just on what I've heard because I don't know a lot about early cabinets. But I think in general it was probably fairly relevant, but not a huge groundbreaking game. But I also did think it was neat that it had 4 different, quote unquote, different games on the same cabinet, which I feel like is a decent bit for a lot of the cabinets that we saw at that time. And for my overall rating for this, I gave it a 3 out of 10. I think it's a pretty good Pong clone, and the new gameplay element really does make it feel fun and skill-based, but it's not a huge improvement or anything totally revolutionary in the ball and paddle sort of game style.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty much all I had for it. It was an interesting one. I was surprised because reading all the stuff about the attack button, I thought it was just going to be some lame like gimmick, which I guess it kind of is, but at least it seems like you could have a decent bit of fun with this gimmick.
yeah. I remember before handing it off to you, I was like in my research before I saw the YouTube videos, I thought, oh, this is just another boring sort of Pong clone. But when I saw the YouTube videos, I was like, oh, this actually looks pretty good. As you were saying, like it's definitely a very skill-based kind of mechanic in a good way, I think. So,
right. Yeah, it feels like, I mean, I don't know how it feels to play it, but it looked like it was like a really helpful or like interesting addition, not just the ball randomly goes in a different direction.
Yeah, which we've seen quite a few of those.
Yeah, it's like, I get what you're going for, but I don't know if you're really helping.
Moving on from that, I'm going to cover a couple clones because I kind of just grouped a couple of these clones together that all came out in the early 75, first 3 months of 75, I'll say, somewhere in there. And I just kind of grouped them all up because I don't want to spend that long on any of them. So just to go through them, we've got TV Flipper by Midway. This was a TV pinball clone, which we covered, I think, last episode. It's kind of like a brick breaking game. We also have Hodgepodge, which is a great name.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's by Project Support Engineering, which also early 75 was a clone of Elimination by Key Games. Why were they cloning that like 3 years later? I don't know, but they went for it. You also have Erase by Sega, and that was a clone of Clean Sweep by Ramtech, which Wes talked about earlier in this episode. So they're getting in on that hype. And then we also have 2 games, Video Pong and Video Pong Sports Combo by Video Play International, which, wow, they used a lot of videos in there.
They did, yeah.
Basically, Video Pong was 3 games, and Video Pong Sports Combo was 5 games on one console, and they just had like the same 3 games as the first one, so 3 of the 5, so I just kind of grouped them together. But I mean, you've got your basic clones in here. You've got, your tennis, your hockey, your like soccer versions, but one of the cooler ones I thought was they have a 1-player version, which is basically, and we're going to start seeing this a lot actually. The 1-player version is just there's either a dotted line on the opposite side that you're trying to hit the ball through, but because there's a dotted line, it's a little harder, and then you just don't want the ball to hit your side or else you lose a point. Or there's a big solid wall out a little bit from the back. So you kind of have to go around the edges and hit the ball like in behind the back of that wall, which will then bounce off the back of the wall and then through the edge of the screen. So that's kind of like what the 1-player version is. It's not an actual AI that's like versing you. They're just static objects and you're trying to shoot around them. But it also had a clean sweep style game. So I thought that was interesting to have in a cabinet that already had a bunch of Pong clones. So yeah, it's a better one, I would say, than some of these other clones. Yeah.
Shows that the clean sweep kind of sort of not break out, that's not out yet, but the sort of brick breaking style were popular. And also I think it sounds like that's similar, the 1-player you were talking about, similar to some of the hole in the wall games that we looked at with the 74 consoles, except just a 1-player version. So it's interesting that that's sort of sticking around in all these different iterations.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And so the next honorable mention that we have is Dodgeball and Dodgem by Atari and Key Games. That was in January 24th of 75. I actually have a day there. That doesn't happen often.
I know.
These were probably never released, though, but they were listed on Atari's internal documents.
Yeah, and Atari actually is going to start keeping really good records of their stuff. So basically
Thank
all
goodness.
Atari games of 75, we've got exact dates for. Although this one's weird because they didn't really come out with it. So.
Right,
And
we have a date for it, but it never get released.
Apparently, like, there's no physical evidence of them, so we don't even know how it played. But the one thing I do know about it is that Dodgeball was the Atari one, and then Dodgem was the Key Games, and they were supposed to be slightly different games, but I don't think either came out. So after that, we've got Pursuit, which is the other one I tried to review this episode. But unfortunately, there's no emulation for it, so I couldn't play it, and I couldn't find any video of it either, which is weird because it's by Atari and Key Games, and you would think someone would have it. And so,
yeah.
What's up with that, people? But this one came out in January 31st of 75. And it's a dogfighting game where planes would appear on the screen, and then you had to move your crosshair over them and shoot them down. And even though we don't have any video of this, I'm pretty sure that the crosshair was either static or even an overlay, and you kind of move the whole camera so that the plane was that you were trying to shoot was straight in front of you and then shoot. So it was from a first person perspective, which is kind of interesting. And I think having the kind of 360 degree like viewpoint was also kind of interesting. Although you weren't like moving, like you were like in 3D space or something. So it felt more like a turret kind of game, like in Star Wars or something.
Right.
So,
yeah. Shooting down the TIE fighters.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it was an interesting one. I will say the planes that you shot down, at least on the flyer, looked decent. So can't complain there.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then the other one we've got here is Robot by Allied Leisure. This is a rebound or volleyball type game. So your paddles are on the ground, and you're trying to like hit it of the ball up over a net to your opponent's side, and just kind of physics so that the ball always wants to go down towards you. But the reason why it's called Robot is there's an AI mode to it, which I think volleyball already and rebound are very hard games. So I imagine the AI would probably kill you pretty easy. But what's even more interesting was they had a display mode for this game where two AIs would verse each other, which seems pretty advanced, honestly, for the time. So that's pretty interesting, I thought.
Yeah, I wonder and how well they actually kept the game going, because that was, especially in older games, like, well, yeah, it'd be funny if it just bounced on the ground, but I know in older games especially, there's always when there was menu screens, it went idle, it showed like the game playing for a little bit before you went back to the menu screen.
Right.
So
yeah.
That kind of thing of like the game being played as a demo is like very popular.
Yeah, especially because a lot of like local stores will put them in their window displays so that people walking by can see. But I can't imagine how good they were. I imagine that they probably had larger paddles and maybe moved semi-randomly, because I feel like any harder AI than that seems kind of unlikely at the time. But,
yeah, it seems real early for that, so I'm interested about how well they actually did.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was no emulation on that one either, so I couldn't check it out. But let's move into some other things that we were able to check out. But first, you got a couple
more honorable mentions before we get into that. So next we have a couple like Speed Race by Taito clones. First one is Racer by Midway in February of 75, and then Wheels by Wheels Racer in March of 75.
Oh, I'm sorry. I totally
Or is that a sequel by Midway?
It's like other people call it that. Like sometimes it's called Wheels, and sometimes
Wheels
it's called
or Wheels Racer.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry.
Okay, and that's another one by Midway, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And those were both, as I said, Speed Race clones of Taito. One had a bigger cabinet, and the other one just had an optional seat attachment.
Which is probably pretty nice.
Yeah, after standing up and playing all those racing games, I wonder if that was a big hit. And then next up, we have Hot Shot by Micro and Super UBI Cocktail Table by United Billiards Incorporated in 75. And those are both just Pong clone variants or something along those lines, but we don't really have much info on those at all. And next up, getting to the namesake of the episode, The Return of the Odyssey, and one that I was actually able to play a version of, we have the Odyssey 100 console.
Woo!
And yay, another Odyssey is what I wrote in my notes. But it actually is a little exciting to see them coming back and seeing what they're able to do with it. And in doing a little bit of research on this, it was kind of Ralph Baer's attempt to see if he could go back to sort of the original vision he had of a cheaper and simplistic home console. The system itself is kind of hilarious. It's like this orange, and it looks like the 70s imagination of like space age technology.
Oh yeah.
Shiny stickers, and the font that says Odyssey is awesome. But interestingly, it didn't have detachable controllers or separate controllers like the older Odyssey did. This one just on the console, sort of diagonally on the bottom two corners. On each side, there's 3 knobs that the players would use. And one of the knobs is for horizontal movement of the paddle, one is for vertical, and the other one is to move the ball around, basically put the English on it.
Oh yeah, gotta keep that around.
Got it. It's the Odyssey staple. And there is no on-screen scoring, which I wrote in all caps, because in an effort to make it cheaper, I think, the way you score is literally a sticker that has a bar with scores on it in the center of the console, and these little plastic arrows that you move up manually every time you score a point.
Oh yeah, at least they were within reach, right?
Yes, yeah. It's in the middle of the console, and it probably worked. And I guess if it made the console cheaper and they were able to pump it out because of that, maybe a good decision. It seems a little funny now, but at the time might have made sense. And then also it did have a knob to center the line on the screen, I guess if it got uncentered, or you could move it around. And then another one to adjust the speed of the ball in the game. And one thing that I thought was really cool, which I don't think we've seen in a home console, but I could be wrong, is that it actually had sounds originating from the console itself. So it made beeping sounds when you were playing all the Pong-like games that were on this.
Yeah, the Video Master from last episode did have sound.
Okay.
But it's still like the second to have sound. And
right. And on a home console, you'd have to think that's pretty groundbreaking, or it seems like it's pretty groundbreaking.
It's definitely like one of those where with the on-screen scoring, or you're like, it's got to have it by now.
Yeah.
It's mandatory.
And just another interesting tidbit, the chipsets that were made for this console were actually created by Texas Instruments, which I know for me, I always just think of the calculators, but they were doing other stuff at the time too. And so for the gameplay, there were 2 games on the system, and another difference from the original Odyssey is that this one didn't have cartridges. It was just the console that came with the 2 games, and those were the typical Pong kind of games you see, and it was tennis and hockey. And in the typical Odyssey quirk, you could still move the paddles on the opponent's side of the field, but there was a top and bottom boundary. And to me, it looks like the controls would have been a little difficult because there's 3 knobs, one for horizontal, one for vertical, and then I don't know how you manage to jump off of one of those knobs to do the English real quick in case you need to do that. But
that's actually pretty true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, it just seems kind of weird. And in one of the videos, or in the video where someone was taking a look at it, they mentioned how like you gotta kind of, maybe you're doing the claw grip like people do on the Xbox controllers now for speed runs.
Yeah,
or something like that. So for the graphics for this, I gave it just a 1 out of 10. It is impressive that it looks pretty decent for a home console, but it's still just simple black and white graphics and no on-screen scoring.
And there's no overlays. What happened?
And no overlays, which we were giving them graphic points for, whether we should have or not. But it did make it a little bit more interesting, at least.
Mm-hmm.
But I did like that Magnavox got the message, and they said, hey, maybe our paddles shouldn't be squares and we should make them into lines. So
yeah.
No more giant squares on the screens. It looks like just Pong.
Yeah, and I think also having the boundaries on the top and bottom meant that, like, if you were playing the Odyssey, like sometimes your paddle would just float off on the screen, you had no idea where it's at.
Right, have to mash the reset button, but
Yeah.
now there's not a need for that as much to reset your thing because you can actually keep it on screen and know what's going on.
And I don't know if you know this or if you were able to look it up, but for hockey, did that have boundaries on the sides, like
It did,
hard
yes.
boundaries?
Yes, yeah.
Oh,
So
nice.
it was the sort of the version of like the hockey soccer-ish games where it's the goal basically. It's Pong, except there's a goal that you have to get it into.
Because I know with the first Odyssey, they had a hockey game, but it was basically like, the center of each edge was the goal, but it wasn't like a hard goal. Like, it could still just like pass up top and just keep going forever.
Yeah, it didn't actually matter, and it was just the overlay that was like, hey, there's a net here. You've got to trust us.
Yeah. So it's good that they've got some more physics in it, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, they were definitely taking a lot of notes from some of the other home systems and from just a lot of the Pong cabinets that were happening at the same time. But it's nice that they were able to put that into their own home system and make a lot of improvements over what they had before. So for the sound, I gave it a 2 out of 10. The sound wasn't really super great, didn't have a lot going on, but I think it's pretty cool that they were able to do that sound on a home console, even if it is just simple beeps.
Yeah,
and
we can take a listen to that too.
Yeah, so let's take a listen to this. Yeah, so it's pretty cool when you imagine that that's coming out of the space age console that you have sitting in front of you in the 70s. Mm-hmm. And for the gameplay, I gave it a 2 out of 10. I think it's definitely a big improvement over the old Odyssey, but it's still pretty simple. And I think probably because if you're trying to make this cheaper home console and you want it to be kind of simple, it's hard for it to have the same functionality as a lot of the arcade cabinets. So when you're comparing it to those, it seems like, man, they're really behind the times. But it's just, for a home console, they're always going to be a little bit behind because the arcade cabinets were just able to do so much more.
Yeah, they're so much bigger and more expensive, to the point where an average person can't afford that. But, you know, the home consoles, they were for the average person, so.
Yeah, so it's, if I'm rating it just on the gameplay and how fun it was, that's where I gave it the 2 out of 10. But the idea that it's actually a home console means like the kind of gameplay it was giving you was actually pretty good for the time and something that you could do in your own home.
Yeah.
And for relevance, I did give it pretty low just because I think a lot of the systems that we covered at the end of 74, even though they were kind of released in Europe, and I don't know if they were distributed to the US, but they did a lot of the same stuff already. So I only gave it a 2 out of 10. I like that it was a newer version of the Odyssey console, but also they have another one that's going to release very shortly after this one that might be slightly more relevant than this because it's a little bit, well, hopefully a little bit better than the Odyssey 100.
Yeah, hopefully.
But also, yeah, we'll have to see when we get to that one. But just because there were other consoles that kind of, it was a home console and it did the same thing, like the Video Master, I think, if I'm getting the name right, or some of the other ones, I didn't think it was super relevant as a home system.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, I gave it a 2 out of 10 rating. I think it's a cool console, and I do like the Odyssey. I have a soft spot for them because the first games were kind of horrible, and I like the overlays. So I do think this is pretty neat, but the control scheme looks like it was kind of hard to use, and it wasn't super innovative over what a lot of other home consoles were doing at the time. But overall, still a pretty good entry into the home video game systems of the time, I think.
Yeah. One thing about it that I really find interesting is, so the Odyssey came out before Pong, right? And the Odyssey, the table tennis version, had the 4 directions. You could go vertical and horizontal, but then Pong came out and it was only vertical, so you're on the edges the whole time. And up until this point, there's been a lot of arcade cabinets that'll do one or the other. But when they redid their console for the Odyssey 100, I'm kind of surprised they stuck with their old version that went in all directions and not just the vertical, because I feel like that would have been easier to program and even reduce the price and stuff. But they must have really believed in that.
You wouldn't need the extra movement either, because you'd be just doing vertical, so it would only be the knob for the vertical movement in the English.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know if it was something that they, I mean, I guess you can see the mindset where you're like, well, why would we restrict the movement? But there is that sort of weird thing where it's like it kind of made the game better when you didn't have as many options in Pong.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think Pong, the controls that it had are better than it being in all directions, especially when you can accidentally go to the other side of the screen.
Right.
But I don't know. I just found that I feel like it was harder to program, and they were still like, no, we want to do it. So
yeah, it could have been. Maybe it was a big sticking point for Ralph Baer or whoever was helping program it.
I mean, to be fair, like there were arcade machines that were still doing it, and they were the one that did that first. So maybe for them, it's like a staple of their brand.
Right, kind of differentiates them.
Yeah. So I just find that a little interesting.
Yeah, I think overall it's an interesting console. But why don't we move on to last honorable mention that you have?
Yes. And this one's a doozy. But one other thing about the Odyssey, though, I quickly wanted to mention is...
sorry.
No, it's okay. Unlike the original Magnavox Odyssey, these are the only games that come out with this because it didn't have cartridges, so whatever was on the console is all that ever was released. So it's just tennis and hockey for the Odyssey 100.
Yeah.
That's it. So that's why we were able to kind of give the whole console a rating right now. So... But yeah, so moving on to my last honorable mention, it's Last Inning by Sega, and then they also had that was the cocktail table version. Oh no, that was the upright cabinet version, and they had a cocktail table version called Table Baseball. But this is probably an electromechanical game, which is why I say it might be like a doozy. I actually think it's kind of like a hybrid. But the core of the game is you've got your standard baseball setup. One person's a pitcher, one person's the batter. And unlike baseball by Ramtech, which is the one I don't think actually came out last year, you can't move the outfield at all, and there's like no real animation. It's just like a ball being thrown, and the ball can do different things, which I'll explain in a sec. And then like just the batter's bat. There's no, human person being animated or anything.
Right.
So that's probably even more of an inkling that the last one probably didn't come out in 74, but whatever. Anyway, the cool thing about this game is the pitcher had 3 different pitches they could pick from. One that was like a fastball, one that was like curveball, so it was like slow. And I think one maybe was like a slider and it moved in the middle. I'm not too sure. But they had 3 different pitches to try to throw the batter off. And then the batter just basically had to time it correctly. And, if it was out of the strike zone, they didn't have to go for it. But the game ran for 2 innings long, so not that long, but I could kind of see that being a fun little thing that you would still feel like you got your 2 quarters worth. But yeah, it's an interesting one. The electromechanical part looks to be more on the cabinet where there's like lights popping up and sound effects that are not being generated from the game.
Right, okay.
But I do feel like making a ball like come down the center of the screen and then having a bat that hits it by pressing a button is probably pretty doable for video games at the time. So I want to say that part is a video game, but I can't be sure because we don't have great video of this. We don't have emulation. We just have a couple flyers and pictures and descriptions. So yeah, it's a little bit of a hard one to do, as is with actually quite a lot of the sort of Japanese games that have come out. So it doesn't help that half the flyers are in Japanese. I'll tell you that.
Right. Need a translator or something.
At least it's Sega again. Every time I see a Sega game, I'm like, this could be the one that, really makes them huge. We're
getting hopeful for their big video game break.
Yeah, when they come out with Sonic or whatever now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not yet, I don't think. I mean, I think the game probably sold all right, but it's not... incredible. So, yeah. I mean, it's still like any baseball game. It's probably going to do pretty good, I think.
Yeah, both America and Japan probably pretty popular.
Yeah, and having the 3 different pitches, and just timing the bat right. I mean, you've got your core baseball heart and soul right there. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. Why don't you take us out on these last couple honorable mentions here, Wes?
Yeah, so the next 2 that we have, the first one is Aztec TV Cocktail Table by PMC. And this one came out in March of 75. And basically, it's just a clone of Hockey by Ramtech. We don't have much more information on that. And the next one is Inca TV Cocktail Table by PMC, which we have no info on, but given that it's Inca and Aztec, it's probably just a different version of the Aztec cabinet or cocktail table.
Yeah, it could have just been complete marketing purpose. We don't really have any info on that.
Could be like Dr. Pong, where it's just they threw something on the front of the cabinet and
yeah, new game.
Yep.
So yeah, and that'll do it for us today. I don't know how many games we covered. I want to say 20. So we're getting through them. Getting through them little by little. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Just as a quick recap, Wes and I talked about 1974 at the beginning, talked about some of the best games and worst from that year. And then Wes covered Sportarama by United Billiards and Odyssey 100, which was the console that came out sometime in the early part of 75. We don't know exactly when, but I think it's fair to say pretty early in the year. So, yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool. We're going to get into
strong start to 75.
Yeah, it's nice to have a console in there because previously all the consoles were grouped up at the very end of the year, because of a holiday release. But I'll tell you right now, in 1975, they were a lot more spaced out. So it'll be nice to see them every now and then. And then we also got another interesting thing that was a first for this episode was the Creative Computing newsletter, which we're going to see in the future as well. So that's also pretty cool, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited to see some more of those. I always like playing some of the interesting computer games.
Yeah, and the first two that they had were actually fairly interesting, I thought. So I just need to hire some programmer to run them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode, the first episode of 75. Like I mentioned, there's probably going to be quite a few more. I don't know how many exactly, but there's a lot of really great games. I can positively say that because I just looked at them a couple hours ago. Yeah, be ready because there's going to be a lot of stuff that will surprise us all, I think. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Be sure to check out our website, our Twitter, our email. I think that's it, right? I always forget something. Yeah. That's all we got. So well, check out our MySpace now.
Yeah, exactly. Hit us up on LinkedIn.
What did they have in 75? Yeah, send me a link on Cyber One, the Plato terminal. So no, don't do that. It'll take me 5 hours to figure out how to open my inbox. So that'd be bad. All right. So we'll see you guys next time. Have a great week. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.